Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this afternoon's session looking at Achieving Transformational Results. My name is Sharon, and I'm the consultant at Pearlcatchers. I've worked in public and private sector organisations over the years, helping to deliver change and cultural change and to achieve transformational results for those organisations. This afternoon, we're going to be talking specifically around culture change and the impact that that has on organisations. For those that haven't used one of these sessions before, just a couple of suggestions. The first thing, we will be asking at various points for your input and asking questions to make this session interactive. So if you haven't already, can I suggest that you bring up the chat box that you have. If you look at your desktop, there's an option there towards the right-hand side to pull up chat, and then you'll be able to respond to the questions that I ask. Also, if you haven't already, can I suggest that you mute yourself so that we don't kind of capture each other's background noise. So, on to the topic. That we're going to be looking at today. A real initiative. Somewhere between 50 and 60% of those fail to achieve their original objectives. It doesn't mean they necessarily fail totally, but they don't achieve what it was that people wanted them to achieve when they were first set up, which is quite a scary figure, bearing in mind how much time and effort is put into change initiatives and all the problems that it causes and the disruption it causes for people on the ground. So what we're looking at is ways to try and overcome some of those. One of the main reasons that these change initiatives fail is because people focus very much on the process or the system that they're changing and don't consider the human aspects or the culture that's necessary to make that new change happen. So today we're going to introduce you to what is culture change all about, why is it seen to be so hard in organisations, and we'll introduce you to one of the methodologies we use called the cultural web as a way of helping you to both design and assess your culture and to change that moving forward. So, what does cultural change fail? One of the big issues for me, I think, is that people tend to think that change and cultural change particularly is down to HR. It's something that's held and something that's decided to see management. It's a leaf now on the heart. A little quotation here. I was a bit of tongue leak. So, like that, is it hard? Absolutely, legit. Yeah. And then HR comes to managing. So have a big idea that are coming down from senior management saying, yep, this is what we need to do. But that's not always translated into what's happening on the ground for people. So the modern cultural check-out is to get ideas for people initially, but then it's they do from that. So getting people to start the system is great, but what actually happens afterwards can be even more of an issue. So we'll take that quote a little bit further. We can say, it came to pass that management further spake unto HR, saying, behold, you launched us unto the sea of excellence, but we sank in the sea of frustration. And response from HR, that's not coming in the excitement launch. Launching is easy. Staying afloat is the difficult part. And that's the difference of a culture change. So a lot of initiatives will come up and they'll have new ideas, they'll start things going fine. But to actually really embed a change, to make it happen, to make it the way that the organisation is working in the future, you need to really change the culture that sits behind things. So what would be really useful now is to get a bit of input from you guys on why do you think it is so hard to change culture? What are some of the things that might hinder culture? some of the things that make it harder to make that cultural change. If you can just type in some ideas for that onto your chat now, that would be great. So, skepticism. Yeah, a lot of people aren't quite sure about what this culture change means, what it's all about. People kind of being quite stuck in their old ways to doing things. What will I lose? So, there's a lot of the fear around changes is around what's going to happen to me, what's it going to mean to me, that whole fear of change. The other thing that I find quite often is that people don't really get what culture change is or what culture is. It's seen as being one of these big fluffy HR things that it's quite hard to be tangible, to get tangible facts and figures about, to really understand what's happening. And because people find it hard to understand, that therefore means that quite often they don't know what to do with it. And a lot of what you've said so far, interestingly, is focused very much on the people side of change, the sort of the emotional side of things. I'm going to bring up a little image now that we looked at early discussion on this. This morning, square with the what the system is up with me, you take a little bit of time to catch up this afternoon, is a variation on that image, which looks at, you still have your same cart, still have pushing that cart, still have looking up at a butterfly. And one caterpillar says to the other caterpillar, you're never going to get one of those butterfly things. So if we're thinking about this from the people in a huge environment, what are you thought of that? So not so much just the cart itself and the general change, but the two butterflies, the two cats on top of the cart and how they're thinking. What does that tell you about people's personal reactions to culture change and inevitability of change? Okay, if you can just jot down your thoughts and ideas about that. So yeah, we've got someone saying, oh, it's a step too far for me. Maybe, yeah, I'm quite comfortable sitting here. I'm actually having quite an easy on the back of this comment. People are pushing and pulling, and actually that looks quite scary and quite hard work, flat nose wings up there. Secondly, yeah, if it's not broken, don't fix it. Actually, it's fine for me. I'm quite happy. Why do we need to change it? It might be a bit of a pain now and again, but it still works. And things like computer systems, it never ceases to amaze me in organisations. Everyone moans about their computer system and how awful it is. But as soon as you start trying to change it, oh, well, I don't know, it was okay. And another thought is actually, okay, this butterfly might be up there now, but what happens if it comes crashing down? So there's huge, huge fears of change. So what this particular image represents are really, for me, the two barriers, the two key barriers that are behind change. One of those are the mental and the human barriers. So we've got the caterpillars here who are thinking, I'm not ready for change. I don't understand what it's like to be a butterfly. It doesn't look very good to me. And actually, in their case, they're not recognising the inevitability of change. Because as a caterpillar, you're going to kind of end up being a butterfly whether you like it or not. And it's how you choose the journey that's going to get you there that's going to make the difference. So there's all those human aspects. And then the bit from the cart itself is recognising that there are also a lot of organisational aspects as well within that. So those are the organisational barriers, the things that make it hard for the culture to change. So it's those physical representations. So, for example, one thing I've seen in a lot of organisations, they suddenly say, we want everybody to make a difference. We want to reward individuals. But then if you look at their performance management and reward process, There's no way of grading someone's performance, and people don't get a higher salary increase or bonus because they've done a good job. So one thing doesn't necessarily support the others. We say that we want people to come up with new ideas, but the organisation is very control and command, and if people come up with new ideas and make a bit of a mistake, then they get hammered by their boss. So what tends to happen is that the organisational barriers tend to make the human barriers even worse. So that's the concept around culture. And the tool that we use quite a lot to help make this happen is something called the cultural web. The cultural web is a model that was created by a guy called Jerry Johnson. It's been very successful. I set it with one of my colleagues who was involved in the merger of Blacklow Wellcome and Smith Fine Beecham, which is seen to be one of the most successful mergers of organisations. And they use the cultural web to help them to create a totally new culture for their new organisation. So this afternoon, I'm going to briefly talk you through the different aspects of the cultural web and to get you to think about how that might apply to, initially, police forces in generally, but maybe later on you might want to think about how this applies to your own force. So you can use the cultural web to both assess your current culture and to design your desired culture. So if you're using it to assess the culture, you work from what we call the outside in. So the 6 petals or strands that we have on the outside are what we call the physical representations of the culture. So whatever your culture is, it will be represented by these things. So looking at what kind of organisational structure you have, where the power is in the organisation, how you control things through your processes, etc. So all of those are the physical representations. And what happens is to assess the culture, you look at each of those, and that tells you what is the paradigm, what is it that's different about your organisation that makes your organisation special. If you're looking to design your culture, you start the other way around, from the inside out. So you come up with looking at what is our ideal paradigm, what do we want our organisation to be like? And then you need to look at how do we change what we've got in each of those physical representations so that it supports the new paradigm rather than the old paradigm. So I'm going to look into each of those in a bit more detail and get you to look at this in terms of thinking about it in relation to a traditional police force, should we say. So I know police forces are changing, so I don't want to assume that everybody is still how things were, but let's talk about a traditional police force. So some of the words that I've heard described about police forces historically is they're very evidence-based, that they're very risk-averse, they have strong values and a good desire to make people comfortable and feel safe in their environments, quite a control and command way of working through things, and knowledge is king. Those would be maybe a few things that we would say about the paradigm of what might be seen as a traditional police force. And I recognise that there are huge differences, but let's just use this as an example. So if that's the paradigm of a traditional police force, let's explore the strands that might be underneath it. At this point, I'm going to ask us to go through one to give me some input on what you think things might be. So, organisational structures. The first strand is really how is the organisation structured? So it's not just about the organisation chart, but how many layers have you got? How hierarchical is the organisation? Is it done geographically? Is it done functionally? How do people move within their roles? Do they have very defined job descriptions? Is there quite a variety between things? What sort of grading levels do you have with people? So how does that organisation function from a structural perspective? So from your experience of a traditional police force, can I maybe get some ideas from you? What would you say would be a couple of the characteristics you would expect to find in the organisational structures strand of a traditional police force? So, yep, quite top down. So very much a lot of input from senior management. As we said, that sort of control and command. Very hierarchical. So lots of levels, lots of people with different sort of gradings, and you go from this role to this role to this role. And maybe sometimes not much communication between the bottom and the top, so coming down in that top-down way. Very structured, very rigid, so people have got very defined roles, and their departments have got very defined roles. So there's not a lot of crossover between people. And maybe sometimes you end up getting a little bit left in the middle between the different areas, some grey areas where things aren't particularly clear. So we think about that from an organisational structure. We've also got here, limited availability for movement. So in terms of people's promotion, particularly now, obviously, with there being less roles, there's much less opportunity for moving upwards or across. Actually really valid point from Leslie that we've had quite a lot actually in some of our work. In fact, there's a big difference between police officers, police staff, and quite often police are being seen as second-class citizens sometimes, and feeling they weren't able to make the same contribution as other people. That's something that we found very, very strongly. And that actually links us quite well to the second one now, which is around power structures. So where is the power in the organisation? So you might have a formal organisational structure, but does that actually show where the power is? So as we said, you might have the police seem to have more power than the police staff. Are there particular departments that have got an awful lot of power? Are there particular individuals who might not always be the most senior people, but people who've been in the organisation a long time and have a lot of influence with people, particularly some of the grapevine and the hidden agenda? And the other thing for me around power is around how much power do individuals have? So how empowered do people feel to do what they need to do to get the job done? So how empowered do they feel to say, actually, no, on this occasion, I know the process is this, but this is what's the right thing to do? And what happens when they get that wrong? So the same thing again would be really useful now. If you could take a minute or two just to jot down what you think might be some of the physical representations of power that you would see in a traditional police force. So it makes a lot of challenges for actually getting some change projects to be done, because you've got things that aren't joined up. So you've got some individuals who are very powerful, and that means that their pet projects got done first. Absolutely. Badges has come through as well. So sort of the rank that you're at, that makes a huge thing. Maybe quite a lot of the old boy network sometimes seen traditionally in police forces. It's quite hard for a lot of women to get into some of the senior roles, and it's even not just about your gender, it's about who you know and your contacts from previously. A lot of real decisions made outside of meetings and then justified through other ways. Some of the senior officers looking for their next promotion. So there's what their intentions at that point. It's maybe more selfish about them and how do I get myself noticed, as opposed to how am I doing what's really right for the organisation and for the people of the area that my force is supporting. So some really interesting things there, I think, around power. So the next area we're going to move on to is looking at routines. Routines and rituals, actually, if you want to get at its title. And these are the things that traditionally happen in an organisation regularly. So they might be things like team meetings. How do people communicate with each other? Do people tend to communicate in really long and boring meetings? Do most of the conversations that are really important take place sort of next to the water cooler or outside of things? How do people tend to feel about their job? Things like the people work long hours to get things done. All of the things that tend to happen frequently. Another example we look at maybe is things like compliance, bureaucracy. Because of the environment you work in, people feel that you actually have to have lots and lots of paperwork to make things work. And I think on this morning's session, one of the things we talked about was around people not following procedures, but their performance not being tackled. So, for example, another routine you might find is poor performance is allowed to continue, so it becomes acceptable for people. So what might be some of the routines that you would expect to see in the traditional police force that we described earlier on? So again, if you can jot down some routines that you think you might be able to have experienced in a traditional police force. One that I've experienced recently is in organisations where people are working lots of overtime, or feeling they can't take time off sick because that might impact them when it comes to the next batch of redundancies, for example. Chief Constable's orders coming down from the Chief Constable, you just do it, those kind of things. Meetings actually quite often become a talking shop. So everyone is so possibly risk-averse of doing things wrong that they spend a lot of time talking about things, but nothing ever moves to action. There's a lot of good intentions, potentially a lot of good ideas, but there's that kind of, I don't want to quite make a decision on this one. Behind closed doors decisions. So you find something happening, you don't really know what's going on with that. People being afraid of speaking up because of conflict, and particularly maybe in the current environment, not wanting to put their head above the parapet because they don't want to get shot down in the next bunch of redundancies that are going to be happening to people. So a lot of people may be being even more afraid of questioning what's coming down from those kind of, as I said, those edicts from on high. So those are the routines that you might have in an organisation. And then the next one we move on to are the formalised routines that you have in an organisation. So all your processes, all your procedures, all your measurements, things like your performance management process, your KPIs, all your targets you work to, your procurement processes, all those kind of things are your controls. So those are things that you use as an organisation to control it and to make sure that it's operating as you think it wants to. So what are some of the controls that you experience in a police force? I know there's huge amounts of regulation and huge amounts of performance targets. What are some of the key ones that you think would influence that paradigm within a traditional police force? Again, if you can just jot down some ideas on that. So shift patterns, yep. So people are in the operational policing, they work in different shifts. Financial governance. So yep, lots of things like what you can do financially, and new governance coming from the new police and crime commissioners now. Lots of paperwork. I remember lots of conversations about, can we not let policemen just actually do their job instead of having to fill out forms the whole time? So an awful lot of paperwork. A big drive now around sort of equal opportunities, the whole need for diversity and inclusivity in the things that you're doing there as well. Some quite clunky procedures, I would say. The bureaucracy, from my experience, is that there's an awful lot of red tape. And one of the things that probably for me links to the previous one on the routines and rituals is there's what I would call an assumption of rules. Something we sort of found on one exercise we did where we said you can do whatever you like. People stuck to some very basic things because they assumed we'd told them to do things a particular way. So there's an assumption that this is a rule, I have to do it this way, and a query of moving forward. And I think that's linked to the fact that there are so many controls that you need to have. Obviously, all the different performance figures that you need to have as well. So around your crime detection, the actual levels of crime, etc., and the conviction rates, all those kind of things. And absolutely, there are a number of things that have got no leeway. So as you said, the rules of law, there are those things that there is no leeway. And I would say the challenge within a police force is understanding which of those things are a given and there is no leeway, and which of those things that aren't. So controls are one of those things that can hold you back. And as I mentioned, I think in this morning's session around the hospitals in Staffordshire, the issues there around the fact that they were driven by their targets, but not actually by the end of that doing what they really wanted to do, and had some quite tragic results for some people because they weren't doing what really they were there meant to do. So your controls, it's really important to make sure the controls back up what is the culture you want to have and ultimately what it is the aim of your organisation to move forward. So the last two now are sort of probably my two favourite often because they're the ones that happen a little bit without intention sometimes. So the first one of those is symbols. So this is the symbolic communication that goes on in your organisation. The things that you and your organisation say, often without saying a word. So your uniform, and obviously that, as we said earlier on, the sort of, the levels of ranks that are shown up there. Your vehicles, your police stations, your police headquarters. All of those things are things that people will see about you. So what are some of the symbols that people see from a traditional police force? things that you might see, whether it's sort of out and about, whether it's on the news, all those things that you don't actually say something, but people see that and think, yep, that's the police, or that's this about the police. Again, if you can just give me a couple of ideas of what might be some symbols. I've given you a couple there, but if we can maybe add a couple more to that, that would be great. So yeah, the senior managers area, you have a really nice posh plush carpet there. You quite often have the executive corridor. It's sort of, and the hushed tones. What happens when we go in there? Maybe we have obviously a lot more sort of historically would be the whole sort of police stations and the welcoming of them. That's something that's changing now with having less police stations now, reducing the numbers not of areas. The executive level vehicles, so yes, the vehicles that senior officers drive in comparison to the vehicles that other people are driving. Yep, the number of pips you've got on your shoulders, the meeting rooms the chief officers go into, so sort of things being much more plush and nice in those kind of areas. Things like, and probably some of the ones that we maybe don't want to see so much is, on the news we always see the police with their batons out, and with their riot gear on and all those kind of things, which, maybe might not be the kind of things that you want to have from that point of view. So there's a lot of symbolic things that the organisation will have without saying a word. And the final of the 6 strands for me is something we call stories and myths. So we've got here an example of a mother telling a story to a child, because actually those are things that are really most memorable to with other people. So the stories we hear are things that we remember most. In an organisation, you will always be told stories about the stuff that's happened in that organisation, about maybe power struggles between different people, about how proud people might be to work for the organisation. Things like, it was always better in the old days, all those kind of things. And so you always will hear stories. And this probably is one of the things that, for me, really shows when an organisation has changed its culture, because the stories change. And one of the challenges when people join an organisation, you might try and bring people with a different way of working into an organisation, but very, very quickly they hear all the stories and the myths and the ways that things have been done in the past, and they tend to adopt those unless something else comes to change those. So a really important aspect, which is often overlooked, is to try and create new stories that back up how good it is in the new world and where you want to go. So what are some of the stories that you think people would say if you were joining your force again today from scratch? What are some of the stories you think people would say to you about what it's like to work in your organisation? So one example for me would be things like, I mentioned this again previously, when we get back to full staffing. So yeah, it wasn't like this. It's going to be much easier now when we change it, and it'll get back to where we are. A thing here about that, yeah, it's all about your number, not your name. People don't care who you are as a person. It's all about the number. So yeah, so I guess, yeah, for you guys in Manchester, there's a whole story about your 2 lovely policewomen that were killed and the impact of that has on people. So that's, that can have varying effects on people. That's going to be a big thing that's coming out about that. Yeah, because of having redundancies, people are going to be saying, oh, it's not a safe environment here. That leads to those things about don't take time off sick, don't sort of leave early because you're the one that's going to be made redundant next time. Yeah, not a job for life anymore, and that's certainly something it used to be seen as. So yeah, a lot of things around those. One that I've heard quite a lot is that, oh well, I'm retiring in 6 months, so it doesn't make any difference to me. I'm just going to carry on and do what's going on. But I think you do still get some positive ones in there as well. I think that I'm proud to be part of this organisation. I'm proud to help the people of whatever the areas that you live. I think you'll get some of those things as well. So those are the different aspects. Those are now is to think about this purely from the point of view of, we've said so far this is about assessing a culture, and you can probably see from what we've talked about so far how all of those different things that we were saying at the beginning, so things like the chief officers are putting their own projects first, that you've got certain parts of the organisation that are seen as more powerful. We've got very structured, very rigid organisation with little sort of movement between those. We've got people that are just told to do things, decisions made behind closed doors, loads of rules of law with no leeway. And you can probably understand why the culture that we get in a traditional police force is very hierarchical, very control and command, very much all those things that we talked about previously. So what we're going to be exploring in more detail on the masterclass is looking at this in a lot more detail and understanding what are those things that drive it and how we can change them, but also taking it to the next stage and looking at how can we change the culture of the organisation and move forward on things. So in the same way that we said we can actually assess the culture from the outside in, we can design the culture from the inside out. So what I'd like to look at briefly now is to say, okay, what might be a desired culture for a police force moving forward? We've talked that obviously one of the things we want to be looking at here is being more creative and more empowered. But if you were just to look at some words that you felt are important for police forces today to be successful in the current environment, can you maybe just type in sort of a few words that you think would be nice words to have, good words to have in that paradigm that would actually help police forces to do the very great job, the very difficult job that they've got in the challenging situations they're in currently. So if we just jot down a few words around that, and then we can compare those to what we've got currently in the various different strands underneath that. So we've got having a can-do culture. So looking at reasons why we can do things is one. Yep. One that I might think about here is risk-aware, not risk-averse. So I think you don't want to forget that you've got risks involved in things, but how you can have that awareness of it without letting that stop you from doing everything that you want to do. Any other ideas of things that we might want to include in our future culture? Okay, so that is looking at the challenge, not the problem. So maybe being solution focused, if you like, rather than being problem focused would be one. Okay, and the other one I would like to add into that is to be empowered. So I think that's a really, really important thing, and something I've found hugely in the work that I've been doing, that it's around getting people to feel empowered, to feel that they can make a difference as individuals to help them move forward. And okay, we've got here, not so fixed to police regulations. So maybe the word for the positive things, we try and take the word not out, would be to be flexible. To be flexible where possible. Recognising there are occasions where you can't, but to be seen as being much more flexible as an organisation and as individuals within that organisation. Okay, so those are some things that we're looking at there. So to be that, probably a subset of that is going to be to need to have some degree of creativity. So if we're saying our desire for culture now moving forward is that you've got people who've got a can-do attitude, they're solution-focused, not problem-focused, they're risk-aware, not risk-averse, they're empowered and flexible, and they're creative. And ultimately, I guess what that comes down to is it's about doing the right thing, not necessarily about doing things right. So sometimes it's easier to do a task right, but is it the right task to be doing? So it's really focusing on what's the important things here. So if that's the paradigm that we want to create within our organisation, let's have a little look at what we've said exists currently in some of the police forces. So to create this can-do culture, let's have a look first of all at the power structures within the organisation. So when we looked at this previously, we were saying that you've got the organisation not very joined up. You've got certain powerful departments, and you've got certain individuals who are very powerful. Chief officers may be putting their projects first before other things. We've got that difference between the police staff and the police officers, and people not feeling empowered as individuals. So those don't really sound to me like physical representations that are going to support where we wanted to go as an organisation moving forward. So what would be some suggestions from you guys about what would we need to have instead in that power strand? So to help us achieve a can-do culture where people are solution-focused, they're empowered and flexible and creative, what would we need to have instead of having not joined up organisation, some very powerful individuals putting their ideas first, and people down the line feeling they just have to do what they're told? What would we want to have instead of that? Again, if you could just jot down some ideas. So yeah, a really first one is everyone understanding one another's roles. And for those of you that were here this morning, we were talking about systems thinking and the idea of understanding what goes on in the organisation and who does what. And I would maybe add to that everyone has a role to play. It doesn't matter what your level is. It doesn't matter what your department is. It doesn't matter if you wear a uniform or not. Actually, you all are playing a part in protecting the people in your community. Just have another one coming about the no-blame culture. And that's one I would suggest is absolutely essential, but probably very challenging. The traditional control and command, and I guess bearing in mind what your job is to do, or part of your job as police officers, is to find the guilty people and hold them to account. So if that's what you're doing in terms of from a criminal justice perspective, it's quite hard, I guess, for people to not see that isn't what you do when you're talking about your staff and them being empowered and coming up with new ideas. Clear communication on what's going on across the organisation. So yeah, that's going to be important. And I think having those senior managers potentially being able to say, okay, we're not going to hide all of these decisions and these conversations behind closed doors. We are going to actually get out there and ask people, get their involvement in things. And we are going to let people know that they're doing well, even if they haven't achieved exactly what we want to, about recognising contribution as well as actual performance. So a number of things to look at in terms of the power area that we need to focus on from that perspective. So let's look at one other of those, I think, and then we'll open up for some questions and things. So let's have a look at stories and myths. So moving forward, if this is the organisation that we want, that can-do culture, solutions-focused, people are empowered, creative, flexible, what are the stories that we want people to be hearing if they join your organisation in 6 months or a year? When you've changed your culture or your culture is changing, what are the kind of stories you want people to be hearing when they're moving into the organisation? So yeah, this is a great place to work. And for me, I guess what comes with that is I make a difference. For me, is a really important thing, I think. And that was actually, I mentioned earlier on about the GlaxoSmithKline Beecham merger, and that was one of the things in their paradigm was I make a difference as an individual. So that was really important. We've also got here being part of a team. I think those two things come together. It's actually being a team and being an individual. About it being a progressive organisation that encourages self-development. And I think that's really important. So we talked about being a learning organisation. And people think that sometimes that means just about, we have lots of training. But being a learning organisation is so much more than that. It's about individuals learning, but it's also about learning as an organisation. And as Rachel said, they're being progressive and looking at ways we can learn as individuals and as teams and how we can continue to be better with things. Challenge and support. That's kind of as well here. And being supported by your colleagues. I think that's part of the team thing, is to feel that if you do take a risk and try and do something differently, to think that people are going to support you with that. And the bit that James added there is around challenge. So it's good to give people support, but sometimes you just need to challenge them and say, really? Is that really all we can do? Have we really got to do it this way? So be prepared to just stretch ourselves that little bit in a positive way, but knowing that you will get that support there if you maybe don't get things quite right. Tapping into the expertise from within. You have huge amounts of resources within organisations. And I remember when I worked for a big organisation myself rather than now working with them. And it used to frustrate the heck out of me when people used to bring in their favourite consultants who would come in And I would have been going around telling people there was a problem with something, we should sort something out, and nobody took any notice of me. And then the consultants came in and asked what the problem was, and I told them. And they asked what we can do about it, and I told them. And then they went and told our senior management, charged them an absolute fortune, and they decided to do it. And it's amazing how many organisations don't listen to the expertise from within. Or the people within the organisation don't feel empowered to raise their issues and concerns and to suggest their improvements because they feel that they is that blame culture and they want to move forward. So I think, people saying, actually, do you know what, actually I am challenged, I am supported, and actually come up with your ideas because people will listen to you. You will be heard. They might not always agree with you, but you will be heard. And wouldn't that be a great place to work where you're saying, actually, it's a great place to work. I'm really supported by my colleagues. I know that I make a difference. I know that people listen to me. And ultimately, I think what comes from this, though we haven't put it here explicitly, is I know I'm making a difference to keeping the people in my community safe and to giving them confidence that they can go out on the streets without having to worry about things. And what a huge vocational thing that is for people to do. But it's very easy in the current environment of all the issues around pensions and redundancies and salaries for people to start feeling demotivated and to lose focus on what they actually joined the police force for. And that's something we found quite a lot in dealing with people. And there's something about needing to re-engage them is what's really important. And a cultural change done well can be a really brilliant way to bring people back together on that. So hopefully I've given you a little bit of an idea here of some of the issues around culture and introduced you briefly to the cultural web as a model. On the masterclasses, we will be going into that in a lot more detail, and we are going to be looking at it from the point of view of how you create a creative, empowered organisation for police forces, and we'll be exploring quite a lot of detail what needs to happen in each of those to make that work. And we will be looking as well at some of the challenges around culture change, some of the best practice we've come across, some of the pitfalls that we've experienced as well. For the rest of this session, what I'd like to do is to open it up to you now and see if you have any particular questions around either the cultural web or cultural change generally, or any of the issues that we've talked about so far today. So if anyone can just jot down if they have any questions or queries they'd like to ask us in the group situation here. Okay. So just give me one more minute to see if there's any questions, then I will wrap up if we don't have any more questions after that. I think I've got one that's just coming in now. Okay. So how long would you expect the culture web to take if you were going to use it with your team? That's a really good question. And there are huge differences in terms of what you're actually looking at doing. Depends on the size of the organisation, how embedded your culture is within the organisation, and how much other work has been done already to get people involved. If you're just looking at a culture within a local team, maybe 6 months. If you're talking about an organisation, I would say really to truly change that culture, you're talking anywhere between 12 and 24 months to really change that. I would say after a year, you're probably making some really good inroads into where you're moving forward. And people will move at different paces within that. So I would say probably 6 to 12 months you'll start to really kind of see something moving with people from that. It very much depends how engaged both the senior management are in wanting to make it happen, but also how quickly they engage the individuals in it. So, for example, the merger I talked about at Black Business Crime Welcome, they got people involved right at the outset. So to help them create their paradigm, they had workshops with pretty much every employee, or certainly huge amounts of them. And they got them to imagine it was a year in the future. And the organisation had been really successful and everything had merged properly. And they got them to literally write a postcard entitled Dear Eddie, who was the chief executive at the time, I love working at GSK because, and got them to write down 3 things. And they gathered of all those things, and that's what they used to make up the paradigm of the future. for the organisation. So everybody had an ownership to that paradigm in the centre, and they felt, yeah, this is something that I can buy into. Once they had that, it became a lot easier to get people involved. I think you need to get that senior management buy-in, and you need the guys on the ground to feel that things are actually working on things. So you need to look at both of those levels. You need to get the senior management on board first, and then you need to make sure that works down. We then get the masses of people involved as well. So we've got a couple of questions here. How can you inspire people to put their own personal stamp on their job? So this is again, it's one of those areas within that around myths and stories, particularly and routines. It's getting people to realise that this isn't. It's not just about doing the routine stuff of things. It's about making a difference for people and how what you can do as one individual can make a difference. So there's some great exercises we do using visualizations and stories to get people to really look at how they can do things individually. We've got one here, keeping up the momentum of change. There's that getting a great enthusiasm, but then things dwindling as other priorities come up. And that really comes down to what I was saying at the outset in terms of that, launching us on the sea of excellence. And that's where it becomes the difference between a process change and a cultural change. So to be a process change, get people involved, they're doing things differently at that level. But for it to really change, then people need to change things at a very, very fundamental level. And I think with the number of changes that you've had in some of the forces recently, there's just a bit too much for people to take sometimes, to take it all on in one go. So I think for me at that stage, it's really important to get the senior management back together to really focus on, okay, what is our purpose overall? So let's come back to where are we at with things? What do we need to focus on and make sure that everything we're doing is aligned to that? So for me, that's really, really important. I think that momentum of change for me is having that clarity on what's important to you, whether that's your culture, your vision, your values, that's sort of your key priorities. And make sure that whenever you communicate, it links back to those. So it's about continuing to embed that. Otherwise it becomes, oh yeah, we did that project a couple of years ago, didn't we? It needs to be something that is continued and you keep that. And that needs to come from the top, but also from all the other people that needs to filter down to all the management levels as we're moving down. And if they all believe it, it will work through. So I'm certainly not saying that it's easy. If it was, then everyone would be doing it, and I could be out of a job, to be honest, which may well not be a bad place to be in the future. But I think what we are hopefully looking at here is there are some processes, there are some really good tools, but you need to get the involvement of the right people in the organisation. That's really fundamental for anything around cultural change. And certainly one of the things that we would like to do is to hopefully give you some more tips to help you get there. And we'll be looking at doing some of those on the masterclasses that we'll be running next month. So, has anyone got any last questions for me at the moment? If we haven't, then what I will look at doing is the same as we did for the other webinar, is that we'll send you details of a recording of the webinar if you wanted to pass it on to any other colleagues who weren't able to attend today. You can email me at altogetherdifferent@pearlcatchers.co.uk if you have any specific questions, either around this or any of the work that we've been doing that you would like to get some free advice on. Or finally, we said hopefully we'll see as many of you as we can on the sessions next month. I gather a few of you, I think Dave had a few issues with the sound of this, so we will double check on the recording to make sure that, see whether that's come through properly on that. So it may well be that you can listen to it better at that end. But if you did miss out on any information as a result of that, then please do let me know if there's any bits that you want me to repeat, or I can certainly send you some general information and some written information that supports what we've talked about today. But other than that, I would like to thank you very much for your time and attention this afternoon. I hope you have enjoyed the session, and I look forward to speaking to and hopefully meeting some of you again soon. Thanks very much. Goodbye.